Okay, today's lesson is lesson 1, 1.4 and 1.5. We're going to do both together. They cover multiplying and dividing integers. Now, we decided to do them together because really you are pretty much, for the most part, doing the exact same thing that you have always done. Okay, I shouldn't say that. You're going to multiply and divide like you've always multiplied and divided, but you're going to apply some special rules in terms of multiplying integers. So first of all, when multiplying and dividing integers, there are essentially two rules, okay? The first rule is this rule right here, which says that if the signs are the same, your answer is positive. So what that means is if I have a positive times a positive, my answer is positive. And if I have a negative times a negative, my answer is negative. Okay? Then the second rule is right here, which is if your signs are different. And if your signs are different, so if you have a positive times a negative, your answer is going to be negative. Or if you have a negative times a positive, your answer is going to be negative. So essentially you have two types of problems when you're doing multiplying and dividing integers. You have if your signs are the same and if your signs are different. Okay, so those are really your rules. So essentially what happens is you are going to be multiplying and dividing like you would normally multiply and divide, and then apply the same sign after based on the signs of what you have. So if you look at this first example here, example number 1, it has a negative 5 times a negative 6. Negative 5 times a negative 6. Okay, so really what you do is you forget about the signs and look at their absolute value. So what is 5 times 6? 5 times 6 is 30. Okay, so now you go back and you look at the signs. You have a negative and you have a negative. Well, if you have the signs are the same, which these are, one is, they're both negative, your answer is then positive. If the signs were different, then your answer would be negative. So if you look here at example 2, you have 3 times a negative 4. Okay, so ignore the signs initially and just multiply 3 times 4. 3 times 4 is 12. Then you go back up here and you look at your signs. So we have a positive and we have a negative. And if the signs are different, which these are, your answer then is going to be a negative 12. Okay? All right, so what I'm going to ask you to do, it seems to have gotten cut off on the bottom, and I don't know if you can see those problems. So if you want to, you can look in your book. It's on page 24 in your book at the bottom. Or you can just, I'm going to give you a few problems and I'm going to ask that you do those problems. Okay, so you can pause your computer and you can do these. The first problem that you have is going to be 5 times 5. And the second problem you have is going to be a negative 1 times a negative 9. And the third problem I want you to do is going to be, let's do negative 10 times negative 6 times 0. Okay? And the fourth problem I'd like you to do is going to be 4 times a negative 6. So pause your computer and do those 4 problems and then come back. Okay, so 5 times 5. So like everything else, you are going to solve these problems in the same manner that we just did before. You're going to multiply and then afterwards look at the sign. So number 1 is 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25. This is a positive, this is a positive. So because the answer or the signs are the same, our answer then is going to be positive. The second problem that we have is a negative 1 times a negative 9. Negative 1 times negative 9, you ignore your signs. 9 times 1 is 9. You have a negative and a negative, so the signs are the same. When the signs are the same, your answer stays positive. Number 3, you have a negative 10 times negative 6 times 0. Well, a negative 10 times negative 6, 10 times 6 is 60, right? Okay. and we have a negative and a negative. And when you have a negative times a negative, your answer then is positive. So it's a positive 60, but we're not done because you have to multiply positive 60 times 0, which is going to be 0. And then the last problem, we have 4 times negative 6. Well, 4 times 6 is 24, and you have a positive and a negative. And if you have a positive and a negative, your signs are different, so your answer is going to be a negative 24. If you got those right, you can move on. If not, I need you to rewatch so that you don't miss anything. Okay, so the next section here is dealing with exponents, because exponents are very common in multiplication. So it's no different. You're just going to follow the same rules that we've been following all along here. So if we have a negative 2 to the second power, that means when you have to that power of 2, that means that you're going to take a negative 2 times a negative 2. Okay, negative 2 times negative 2. You're going to multiply you did before, 2 times 2, which is 4. And then because you have a negative and a negative, your answer then is going to be positive. So your answer is 4. If you look at, let's see. If you look at B, this is interesting because I should have done this actually. This means that when you have a parenthesis and you have the exponent on the outside, that means that you're going to take the stuff on the inside and you're going to multiply it times itself, okay? But if you look at B, B is negative 5 and then squared. Now, negative 5 and then squared means that it's going to be the negative, the opposite of 5 squared. So 5 squared is 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25, but it's the opposite of, so it's a negative 25. Okay? So essentially what you're looking for is when you have exponent outside of a parenthesis, that means you multiply everything inside. When you have an exponent that has no parenthesis, like this, that means you essentially are doing the 5 squared and then you're adding that on at the end. Okay? You have to understand that. Okay, so I would like you to pause your computer and I would like you to try to do some problems on your own. So I'm going to ask you to do number 9 and I'm going to ask you to do number 11. 9 and 11. Pause your computer, do those, then come back. Okay, number 9. Number 9 is a negative 3 in parentheses squared. That means that you're going to square everything inside these parentheses. So it's negative 3 times negative 3. 3 times 3 is 9. Because you have a negative and a negative, your answer is going to be positive. Number 11 is negative 7 squared, no parentheses. That means that you're doing 7 times 7, which is 49, and then you're going to take the negative of that. So your answer is negative 49. Okay? Okay. I think we're going to move on, and now we're going to move into division. Division is the exact same thing as multiplication. So you will have negative divided by a negative and a positive divided by a positive. Both are going to give you an answer that's positive. And then if you have negative divided by a positive or a positive divided by a negative, those, because the signs are different, are going to give you a negative answer. So the rules for dividing are exactly the same as the rules for multiplying. Okay? Okay, so if you look here at the first example, example number 1, you have a negative 18 and you're dividing that by negative 6. So just like multiplying, you're going to ignore the signs and just divide. 18 divided by 6 is 3. Then you look at your signs. I have a negative and I have a negative, which means my signs are the same. When my signs are the same, my answer stays positive. Okay? Okay. Look at B here. What's the difference here between A and B is that instead of using that division sign, the line with the 2 dots, we're using a fraction bar. So you have a negative 54 over 6. So that over 6 just means divide. So 54 divided by 6 is what? That's 9. Okay, but we have a negative and we have a positive. Signs are different, so my answer therefore is a negative 9. Okay, you have to make sure that you make it a negative 9. All right, let's go on to the next page. Here is an example of where you're going to solve some problems with variables. You're going to plunk in the value that you know. So if in this first example, we have 10 minus x squared divided by y. Okay, but then it tells you that x is 8 and y is negative 4. So you have to plunk in your, so the first thing you're going to do is plunk in what you know. Okay, so the 10 stays a 10 minus x squared. What is x? X is 8. So that's going to be 8 squared. Divided by, what is y? Y is negative 4. Okay. All right, so now you have to use your order of operations. So 8 squared is 10 minus 8 times 8 divided by negative 4. So you have to do your 8 times 8 first. So it's 10 minus 64 divided by negative 4. Okay? Order of operations says that you are going to do your division first before your subtraction. So you have to do that first. So 64 divided by 4. Well, 4 can go into 6 once with 2 left over, and 4 then goes into 24 6 times. Okay? Now, our signs, we've got a negative and we've got a negative there outside of it. But because it's outside of this minus, I'm going to leave that there, and we'll talk more about what you could do with that later. But I think for now we'll leave that there and know that I'm just going to subtract 10 from it. So I have a positive and a negative. Well, if I have a positive and a negative, that means my signs are different, so my answer is going to be negative. So now I have to take 10 minus a negative 16. Now, back in the last section, you're going to use your additive inverse property. So that means it's 10 plus the opposite of negative 16, which is 16. Remember, if it's minus, it's plus the opposite of. So the opposite of negative 16 is 16. So now you're going to add 10 plus 16, which is 26. 26 then is your answer. Now this is kind of a long problem, but that's kind of what we do in 7th grade math. It's multiple steps. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are going to do some of your practice problems. So on the division page, I'm not quite sure what page this is because my page numbers are cut off, but on the division page, I would like you to do number 9. I would like you to do number 13, and I would like you to do, oh, I don't know, let's do number 19. Okay, 9, 13, and 19. Then on your multiplication page, because I do want to give you some examples of multiplication as well, on your multiplication page, I would like you to do numbers, oh, let's have you do 9, let's have you do 13, and then let's have you do 23. 9, 13, and 23, and then I'm also going to have you do number 27. Okay, 9, 13, 23, and 27. Bring that done with your notes tomorrow, and you should be set.